I did it on a Tuesday. That might seem like an odd detail to remember, but I remember it clearly because Tuesday was the day I always drove out to the farmer's market on Route 9, and I had a bag of peaches on the passenger seat when my son called. I pulled over into a gas station parking lot, and he told me he was getting married. I sat there with those peaches in the sun and felt something I couldn't quite name yet. Not joy, not dread, something in between. His name is Gregory. He's 34 years old, and he has his mother's eyes and my stubbornness, which is a combination that has given me more gray hairs than I can count. His mother passed 8 years ago, breast cancer caught too late, and since then it had been the two of us navigating holidays and birthdays and all the spaces she used to fill so effortlessly. I won't say we were close in the way some fathers and sons are close. We were honest with each other, which I think is better. We said hard things when we needed to. We also knew when to stay quiet. Her name is Vanessa, he said. You're going to love her, Dad. I didn't say anything right away. I watched a man at the pump across from me struggle with the card reader, swiping his card over and over. Tell me about her, I said finally. He'd met her 4 months earlier at a conference in Charlotte. She worked in marketing, he said. Sharp, funny, beautiful. They'd spent the first weekend talking until 2 in the morning and hadn't stopped since. He said it the way young people say things when they've decided something and only need you to confirm it, not question it. Bring her for dinner, I said. Next Sunday, I'll make something good. She arrived wearing a cream-colored blazer and a smile that came just a half second too late. That was the first thing I noticed. Most people, when they're nervous about meeting their boyfriend's father, the smile is already there when the door opens. Hers arrived after she'd looked around the entryway, taken in the house, registered something. I don't know what she registered, but I saw her do it. Gregory was beaming. He introduced us and she shook my hand firmly and said, Gregory talks about you constantly. I feel like I already know you. Good things, I hope, I said. Always, she said. I had made pot roast. It was my wife's recipe, low and slow, with carrots and small potatoes and a broth that filled the house for hours. I figured it was the right kind of meal for a first meeting. Honest food, unpretentious. Vanessa ate politely and said all the right things. Complimented the house, asked about my work. I'm retired now, spent 30 years in civil engineering, laughed at the right moments. But there were small things. The way she glanced around the living room while Gregory was talking, pausing on the built-ins I'd installed myself, the framed photos, the oak floors, not admiring, assessing. There's a difference, and I've been in enough planning meetings to know it. After dinner, Gregory helped me clear the table, and she stepped outside to take a phone call. I told myself it was nothing. People take phone calls. I washed the dishes and listened to Gregory talk about her. He was lit up from the inside. I hadn't seen him like that in a long time. Maybe not since he was a teenager and made varsity baseball. I kept washing and nodding and telling myself the feeling in my chest was just old man caution, that I was projecting, that I wanted to be careful with him because I remembered how wrecked he was after his last serious relationship ended 3 years ago, and I didn't want to watch him go through that again. By the time she came back inside, I had almost convinced myself. She stood in the kitchen doorway and said, "This place is beautiful, Gerald. Seriously, the bones of this house, they don't build them like this anymore. Gerald is my name." And there was nothing wrong with what she said, but something about the way she said bones stayed with me all week. They got engaged 11 weeks later. Gregory called me on a Thursday evening and told me he'd proposed at a restaurant in Raleigh, and she'd said yes. He sounded happy. He sounded like his mother used to sound when something went exactly right. I said all the things a father is supposed to say. I meant most of them. Over the next few months, I saw them regularly. Sunday dinners when they were in town, occasional weeknight visits when Gregory came by alone to watch basketball or help me with a project in the garage. Those evenings with just the two of us were the ones I paid attention to. He talked about Vanessa a lot. The wedding plans, the venue they'd chosen, a barn-style event space outside of Raleigh that cost more than I made in my first 3 years of working, and I listened. I asked gentle questions, nothing pointed, but I also started noticing things. The first was small. Gregory mentioned offhand that Vanessa had suggested they look at houses in my neighborhood. I live in a quiet area outside of Durham, established homes on large lots, the kind of neighborhood where people have lived for 40 years and the HOA meetings are more social than functional. It's a good area, but Gregory had a perfectly nice apartment in Raleigh, 25 minutes away, and Vanessa's office was downtown. The suggestion didn't quite fit. The second thing happened at a Sunday dinner in March. Vanessa arrived alone. Gregory was stuck in traffic, and we sat on the back porch while I finished grilling. We talked about the wedding, which was now 6 weeks out. She mentioned that her own family situation was complicated. Her parents were divorced and hadn't spoken in years. She had a brother she wasn't close with. I asked a few careful questions, and she answered them smoothly, but there was a polish to it, the way someone talks when they practice the explanation many times. Then she said something that I kept turning over for days afterward. She looked out at the yard. I have about 3/4 of an acre, mature oak trees, a garden my wife planted that I've kept up out of stubbornness and love. And she said, "You must rattle around in this place by yourself." I said I managed fine. She smiled. "Of course you do. I just mean a space like this deserves a family in it." Gregory's car pulled into the driveway 30 seconds later, and we never finished the conversation. But I heard what she meant. I'm 67 years old, not senile. I have a friend named Arthur who was a private investigator for 20 years before he retired and took up woodworking. We've been fishing together for the better part of a decade. He is not a dramatic man. He doesn't embellish or speculate. When I told him what I'd been observing, all of it in order, the way I'd presented in a project review, he didn't wave it off the way I'd half expected. He asked me a few questions. Then he said, "Do you want me to look into her?" I said I didn't know. He said, "That's a yes. Give me 2 weeks." I drove home with that in my stomach for the rest of the afternoon. I sat in my kitchen and drank coffee I didn't want, and told myself I might be about to make a terrible mistake, that I was a suspicious old man who didn't trust his son's judgment, that Vanessa was perfectly fine and I was going to humiliate myself and damage the most important relationship I had left. The clock on the kitchen wall ticked. I called Arthur back and told him yes. He came back to me in 10 days, not 2 weeks. He sat across from me at the kitchen table with a manila folder and a careful expression. He didn't dramatize it. He laid it out the way he'd lay out any report, systematic, factual, without commentary. Vanessa had been engaged once before, 2 years before she met Gregory. The man's name wasn't important, but what was important was this. They'd been together for 8 months, gotten engaged, and broken it off 4 months later. Shortly after it became clear his parents weren't going to help them purchase a house. The man had mentioned this to a mutual acquaintance. Arthur had found him through some patient cross-referencing I didn't ask too much about, and his account was detailed. There was more. Her LinkedIn profile listed a marketing director position she'd held for 3 years. Arthur verified she had worked there. He also found that she'd been let go 6 months before she met Gregory. She was currently doing freelance consulting, which was fine. People lose jobs, but it had never come up, not once. In all our dinners, and all the times she'd mentioned her work, she'd never referred to any gap or transition. She talked about her job in the present tense, consistently, confidently. And her apartment lease in Raleigh ran through August, which meant when she and Gregory had been talking about moving together after the wedding in June, she already knew she'd need somewhere to go. I sat with that folder for a long time after Arthur left. I wasn't angry exactly. What I felt was more like grief. The specific grief of knowing something that is going to hurt someone you love and knowing you have to be the one to say it. Gregory was 4 weeks from walking down an aisle. The venue deposit was paid. The invitations had gone out. His mother's ring, which I had given him when he first told me he was thinking of proposing, was already on Vanessa's finger. I thought about calling him that night. I picked up my phone twice. But I thought about what Arthur had said years ago about cases he'd worked. He said the hardest thing for people to accept isn't evidence, it's the source. If they love the person who's under suspicion, they will find a way to discredit the person bringing the information before they'll accept the information itself. Gregory would have looked at me and thought, my father never fully warmed to her. My father has been alone for 8 years and doesn't know how to let anyone in. My father is trying to protect me in the wrong way. He would have been half right, which is the most dangerous kind of wrong. I needed him to see it for himself. The wedding was on a Saturday in June at the barn venue they'd chosen, about 40 minutes outside of Raleigh. 220 people, string lights, a bluegrass band for the cocktail hour. It was genuinely beautiful. I will say that honestly. Whoever had planned it had taste. I sat at the family table and shook hands and made small talk and watched my son look at Vanessa the way his mother used to look at the garden in July, like something she'd grown herself and couldn't believe was real. The ceremony was straightforward. The vows were their own words, which I appreciated. Gregory's made me press my back teeth together to keep from embarrassing myself. What happened at the reception happened during the toasts. Vanessa's maid of honor spoke first, warm and funny, the kind of toast people remember. Then Gregory's best friend spoke, and he brought the room to laughter twice and tears once, which is about as well as the best man can do. Then Vanessa's mother stood up. Her parents had both come, whatever their history, and she said something that surprised me, something about hoping her daughter had found the steadiness she'd always been looking for. And then Vanessa's stepfather, a man I'd met twice and found pleasant enough, made a toast that started warmly and drifted in the way toasts sometimes do when the speaker has had 2 glasses of champagne into a kind of joke. He said, and I'm going to keep this as close to his exact words as my memory holds, and Gerald, I hope you're ready to share that beautiful house of yours, because something tells me this young couple is going to need a lot of room to grow. The table laughed. I smiled because the room was looking at me. Vanessa laughed too. She reached over and patted Gregory's hand and looked at me with an expression I recognized from our conversation on the porch. Light, expectant, testing. I held her gaze for a moment. Then I said, loudly enough for the table to hear, "Oh, I'm sure they'll find their own space. I'm very attached to mine." Something shifted in her face. She looked away. I picked up my phone under the table and typed a text message to Gregory. 6 words. "Can we step outside for a minute?" He looked at his phone, looked at me, smiled the confused smile of a groom who was not expecting this at his own wedding reception. He excused himself, and we walked out to a side path where the string lights ended, and the evening was just beginning to cool. "Dad, is everything okay?" I said. "I need to show you something. I'm sorry that it's tonight. I tried to figure out a better time, and I don't think one exists." He went very still. I had printed the key documents from Arthur's report. I had them in the inside pocket of my jacket because I had known, when I got dressed that morning, that tonight might be the night. Not because I'd planned to disrupt anything, but because something about the toasts, about the stepfather's joke, told me she had been moving toward this openly, and I had been quiet long enough. I gave him the papers. He read them in the light from his phone. He was quiet for a long time. A long time. Then he said, "Is this real?" I said, "Yes. Arthur put it together. You know Arthur." He knew Arthur. He'd come fishing with us twice. Gregory went back inside. I stayed on the path. I don't know exactly what he said to Vanessa, or how it happened, or how long it took. I know that about 20 minutes later, the music stopped. I know that I heard voices raised briefly, and then the particular silence of a room where 200 people have collectively decided not to breathe. I know that Gregory's best friend found me on the path at some point and said simply he asked me to stay with you. So we stood together in the cooling air and didn't say much and waited. The drive home that night was the loneliest I have taken since the drive home from the hospital the night my wife died. I want to say that clearly because I don't want anyone to think that I felt triumphant. I didn't feel vindicated. I felt like a man who had just watched something break and who had been the instrument of the breaking, however necessary, and who would have to carry that. Gregory called me 2 days later. He came over on a Wednesday and sat at the kitchen table where Arthur had sat, and we talked for 3 hours. He cried once for about 90 seconds and then stopped and didn't again. He's like his mother that way. He processes inward and emerges from the other side like he's been somewhere. He asked me questions and I answered all of them. He asked me why I hadn't told him sooner. I told him the truth, that I'd been afraid he wouldn't believe me, that I'd been afraid of being wrong, that I'd been afraid of being wrong, that I'd been afraid of damaging something I couldn't afford to damage. He sat with that. He didn't tell me I was right to wait. He didn't tell me I was wrong. He just sat with it, the way he sits with difficult things. "Did you know at that first dinner?" he asked. I thought about it honestly. "I suspected," I said. "I didn't know." He nodded. He asked me about his mother's ring, and that was the one question I didn't have a clean answer for. I told him she'd returned it, through his best friend, in an envelope without a note, and that it was in a small dish on my dresser if he ever wanted it back. He said he'd think about it. Before he left, he stood in the kitchen doorway, the same doorway she had stood in that first night, looking at the bones of the house, and he said, "I'm not okay. I want you to know that, but I'm not blaming you." I said, "I know." He said, "I know." He said, "I need some time." I said, "You have it." All of it? That was 4 months ago. We've had Sunday dinners 3 times since then. Not every week. He's got his own grief to work through, and he's doing it the way he does everything, methodically and privately, but 3 times. Last month, he helped me rehang a gate in the backyard that I'd been putting off because the post needed resetting and my back isn't what it used to be. We worked for 2 hours without talking much. It was one of the better afternoons I've had this year. I still go to the farmer's market on Route 9 on Tuesdays. The peaches are done now. It's late in the season, but they have apples in and some of the last of the summer squash. I walk the rows and I think about things. I think about the fact that I almost stayed quiet, that there were at least 4 moments when I had everything I needed and I could have made the choice to protect my own relationship with my son instead of protecting him from something he couldn't see yet. I could have watched him walk into it. I told myself at various points that it wasn't my right to intervene, that he was an adult, that I might be wrong. I was not wrong. And I think about what it cost to be right in the way I was right publicly at a wedding in front of 200 people who will have their own versions of the story forever. I think about what it cost Gregory to walk back into that reception room and face it. I think about his face in those 20 minutes on the path while I waited and didn't know what was happening. I don't regret it, but I hold it. There's a difference between those two things, and it's taken me most of my adult life to understand what it is. My son is going to be okay. I know that the way I know certain things about load and structure, and the way materials behave under pressure, not as hope, but as assessment. He's got good bones. His mother's mostly, a few of mine. The house is quiet now in the evenings, the way it's been quiet for 8 years. The clock ticks. I make my tea, and I sit, and sometimes I think about her, about that smile that came half a second too late, and I wonder where her accounting of all this lies, whether she sits in her apartment through August and thinks about how close she came, whether she understands what she was actually looking for. I don't wish her harm. I just hope she finds whatever the real version of it is, the steadiness her mother talked about in her toast, the thing she was reaching for. I hope she finds it without taking something that belongs to someone else to get there. The ring is still in the dish on my dresser. Gregory will know what to do with it when the time comes. He always does, eventually. He just needs time to get there. I can wait. I've been thinking lately about what it actually means to protect someone. Not protect in the way we talk about it loosely. Keeping someone safe from traffic or bad weather, or the kind of trouble you can see coming from a distance. I mean the harder kind. The kind where you have to make a choice between your own comfort and their future, and you know that no matter which way you go, something is going to hurt. When I handed Gregory those papers on the path outside the reception, I wasn't thinking about being right. I had thought about being right for months, turning the evidence over in my head, measuring it, second-guessing it. But in that moment, standing in the dark with the string lights ending 20 feet behind us, all I was thinking was that I loved my son, and I was about to change his life on the night he thought his life was finally beginning. That's not a feeling you prepare for. You just stand in it. What I've come to understand is that what Vanessa did, the calculated smiles, the careful words about the house, the way she positioned herself over the course of months, wasn't born from evil. I don't think she was an evil person. I think she was a person who had decided that the ends justified the means, that a comfortable life was worth a few deceptions, that no one would look closely enough to see the seams. And that kind of thinking has a logic to it that's genuinely dangerous, because it doesn't feel like dishonesty from the inside. It feels like strategy. It feels like survival. But survival built on someone else's trust isn't survival. It's debt. And debt of that kind always comes due. Gregory lost something real that night. I don't minimize that. He lost the version of his future he'd been building in his head for almost a year. He lost the particular joy of believing completely in someone and having that belief hold. That's not a small loss, and the fact that it was necessary doesn't make it painless. What I've watched him rebuild in the 4 months since is something I didn't expect to be moved by. But I am. He's quieter now, but not in a defeated way, in the way of someone who has learned to listen to himself more carefully. He asks better questions. He takes longer before he decides. He came over last month and we reset a fence post together, 2 hours of physical work in the afternoon sun, and somewhere in the middle of it he said, almost to himself, I think I was in love with who I wanted her to be. I didn't answer. I just kept working. But I thought about it the rest of the day. That's wisdom, not the kind you find in a book or a quote somebody posts online, the kind that costs something, the kind that leaves a mark. I'm 67 years old. I've made my share of mistakes, trusted the wrong people, stayed quiet when I should have spoken when I should have stayed quiet. What I know now that I didn't know at 34 is that your character isn't what you do when things are easy. It's what you do when the right thing is also the hard thing, when it costs you something real, when you can't be certain you'll be forgiven for it. I chose my son over my own peace of mind. I chose the truth over the evening going smoothly. I do it again without hesitation. The ring is still on my dresser. One day Gregory will know what to do with it, and when that day comes, he'll be ready in a way he wasn't before. Not despite what happened, but because of it. That's the only kind of growth that sticks.